I welcome honourable members of the members of the public and the media to today's committee meeting and live stream submission of the as well as those watching from the parliamentary channel, the Walesi platform, and Facebook on the treaties that are before us. One, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Bukulindi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
The Honourable Chairperson, Mr. Alexander O'Connor, and members of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and Defence of the Parliament of the Republic of Fiji, the Honourable Pio Tikundandua, the Honourable Sele Andemaitonga, and the Honourable Mikaele Lawere. Before I begin the submission, I'd like to acknowledge the input of the CSO actors as this is a joint submission. Maureen Penjueli from PANG, Pacific Network on Globalisation, Emmeline Siala Ilola here from PIANGO, Pacific Islands Association of Non-Governmental Organization, Claire Slater from the Nuclear Free and Independent Pacific, and the Professor Vijay Naidu from the Fiji Anti-Nuclear Group and PANG. On that note, we thank you for this opportunity to speak on Fiji's ratification of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We speak on behalf of Fiji-based regional organizations and networks, the Pacific Network on Globalisation PANG, Pacific Islands Association of Non-Governmental Organization PIANGO, Youngsolwara Pacific, and in the presence of Fiji anti-nuclear activists from decades earlier, who worked tirelessly for a nuclear-free and independent Pacific, NFIP, in the Fiji organizations ATOM against testing on Moruroa, and FANG, the Fiji Anti-Nuclear Group. We acknowledge the many other organizations in Fiji that worked for a nuclear-free and independent Pacific, such as women's and students' organizations, churches and faith groups, unions and teachers' associations, and our leaders and friends, including those from abroad, who have worked tirelessly together in Fiji to lead us through this very long path that Fiji and other Pacific Island countries, where we protested often without success to stop the destructive human and environmental damage caused by nuclear weapons testings in the Pacific. We also recall with pride the many other NGO and government leaders who have gone before us in Fiji and in other Pacific Island countries who acted tirelessly against nuclear testing. With sadness, we recall the many Pacific Islanders, our neighbors, in the Pacific who have suffered illnesses, death, genetic damages, intergenerational trauma, and permanent loss of their homes and places of birth due to the testing of these particular weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons. In Fiji, a very active center of the anti-nuclear movement, we were exposed to so much of the start of the anti-nuclear movement more than 40 years ago. We are therefore honored to be here at this moment in 2020 to lend our support to this positive development, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We as organizations and individuals, speaking for many who cannot be here, strongly support Fiji's full ratification of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. On the treaty, compared to existing nuclear weapons treaties, we understand that there are other treaties that exist that addresses nuclear weapons. The Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, NPT of 1968, which Fiji acceded to in 1972, and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban, Treaty of 1966, which Fiji ratified in 1996. We also know that Fiji played a leading role in developing regional nuclear disarmament platforms, working with other Pacific countries in preparing and signing the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty, Rarotonga Treaty of 1985, which was a regional commitment to having the South Pacific nuclear free in terms of the manufacture, acquisition, possession, or control of nuclear devices in the Pacific region. We supported that treaty for the region, but it had many limitations, not least in the lack of control of nuclear weapons in vessels in our oceans. The difference with this treaty, The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was adopted on July 7, 2017, goes much further than these existing treaties and represents a shift in international thinking and action by a majority of states in the United Nations coming together with civil society to recognize and address the catastrophic impacts of any use of nuclear weapons. The treaty recognizes that the planet and its people cannot survive any nuclear weapons conflict, limited or otherwise, and also no country can survive any use of a nuclear weapon or nuclear accidents. Guided by the expert alert from humanitarian organizations, particularly the Red Cross and Red Crescent in 2010, a new analysis was presented that there is no humanitarian response possible to any nuclear weapon detonation. Facts: nuclear weapons now. The world has approximately 14,000 nuclear weapons held by just 9 countries, the nuclear-armed states. After careful consideration over many years, many states hearing evidence and reports from scientists, philosophers, the medical profession, civil society, and experienced reports of key humanitarian organizations, particularly the International Red Cross and Red Crescent Society, concluded that no nation can survive the impacts of nuclear weapons. After also hearing the testimonies of Hibakusha, the survivors of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, and evidence from nuclear testing victims, including from the Pacific, the majority of the world states have concluded that there is no response, I reiterate, no response possible that can handle any use of nuclear weapons in conflict or accidentally, and these weapons need to be banned. Humanitarian organizations and other partners, including scientists and NGOs, such as International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, have shifted the nuclear weapons debate. Now, the majority of the world states have worked towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. Deterrence, the idea that nuclear weapons, states can hold nuclear weapons and threaten to use them, and that nuclear weapons protect the world, is no longer acceptable, because it is clear that nuclear weapons can destroy the planet and all humanity on it. Medical systems, healthcare, road transport, infrastructure cannot provide adequate assistance if a nuclear weapon is detonated. Even the most developed countries cannot provide humanitarian assistance to adequately respond to help their people. Studies show no state or city in Europe, for example, can handle a nuclear detonation. Nuclear weapons fallout, if large enough, can also cause a nuclear winter or black cloud to circle the earth, covering the sun, ending agriculture and food production, and causing many deaths from famine. Many Fijians have suffered directly as a result of nuclear testing. Between 1957 and 1958, 276 Fijian soldiers and sailors participated in the 9 British nuclear tests conducted at Maldon and Kiritimati, or Christmas Island, now part of the Republic of Kiribati. The health of test veterans and civilian survivors, and that of their descendants, was adversely affected from exposure to ionizing radiation. Independent medical research supports this conclusion. All these considerations have led the majority of states to support the humanitarian initiative, and through many steps, a majority support for this treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons represents a breakthrough treaty, in that, on humanitarian grounds, 122 countries in the world voted on July 7, 2017 for adoption of this treaty. Fiji ratifications are needed to bring the treaty into force. 12 to 13 more ratifications are needed. We hope Fiji will be one of those in 20. With that, I will leave my learned colleague, Professor Vijay Naidu, to continue with the second part of this submission.
Thank you, ma'am. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Honourable Mr. O'Connor, and members of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and Defence of the Parliament of the Republic of Fiji. We applaud Fiji's role in supporting and helping bring this historic treaty into existence. We urge Fiji to speedily ratify the treaty. Fiji voted for the adoption of this treaty on July 7, 2017, one of 9 Pacific states present, making this historic treaty a reality. 122 countries voted for adoption of the treaty. Fiji signed the treaty on 20th September 2017, one of the first countries to do so. Now Fiji must ratify this treaty, and we support Fiji's ratification in the submission today, as speedily as possible. Why we support the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons? The strengths of the treaty are, first, under international and humanitarian law, nuclear weapons, the most destructive weapons of mass destruction ever invented by human beings, are banned on humanitarian grounds. Second, the treaty protects the security of the planet and human life. Third, the majority of the world's countries working with civil society organizations have brought about a shift in international thinking and law on nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are now seen for their annihilating impacts on human beings and the planet, and not as defense weapons where 9 nuclear armed states can hold the fate of humanity and the planet in their hands. The list of prohibitions in the treaty is comprehensive. It is illegal to possess, develop, test, produce, acquire, possess, stockpile, use or threaten to use nuclear weapons.
So